You won't believe how a man pretending to be an HOA agent showed up to harass my dad over a fence. Only to find out he wasn't just dealing with a homeowner. He was messing with a retired Marine sniper. One minute my dad was fixing wood panels. The next he was bleeding, armed, and turning the tables on his attacker. This isn't a movie. This happened. And it all started with a fence. Just a regular wooden fence that had been there for over a decade. It was a quiet Saturday morning. Nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of day where you just want to get some yard work done and enjoy a bit of sunshine. My dad, let's call him Mike, was outside with his toolbox, tightening loose boards and replacing a few rotten planks. The kind of job he took pride in. He's that kind of guy, calm, steady, and always fixing things himself. Birds were chirping. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. It was one of those peaceful suburban mornings. Then came the man. Out of nowhere, a stranger appeared, khaki pants, tucked-in polo shirt, mirrored sunglasses, and a clipboard in his hand. The kind of guy who looked like he was trying way too hard to look official. He walked straight up to my dad without so much as a hello, and immediately started pointing at the fence. "This is a code violation," the man said flatly. "This fence doesn't meet neighborhood guidelines. You'll need to remove it immediately or face penalties." Now, that alone would have been annoying. But here's the thing, we don't have an HOA. There's no homeowners association in our area. No community guidelines. No board meetings. Nothing. My dad wiped sweat off his brow, stood up and calmly asked, "Do you have some kind of documentation about this? Something I can see?" That's when things got weird. The guy instantly became defensive. He waved the clipboard around but wouldn't let my dad actually see it. He mumbled something about new rules and recent changes, but gave no real explanation. When my dad asked for an ID or a business card, the man scoffed and said, "You people think you can just build whatever you want with no consequences." That's when the red flags really started flying. Now, my dad's not the type to jump to conclusions. He's patient, analytical, but he's also got a sixth sense for danger. Because before he retired, he spent over 20 years in the United States Marine Corps. And not just in the Marines. He was a sniper, trained to recognize threats before they happen. He's the kind of guy who could tell you the make of a rifle just by the way it sounds from 2 blocks away. So when he says someone feels off, I listen. And this guy, he felt way off. First, there was his attitude, too aggressive, too rehearsed. Second, his appearance. He had no name badge, no vehicle nearby, no identification at all. And third, the weirdest part of all, he seemed too interested in the fence. Not like someone enforcing a rule, but more like someone who wanted it gone and fast. Still, my dad didn't show any sign of fear or panic. He stood calmly, arms crossed, listening as the man started raising his voice. "I'm giving you a final warning," the man said, stepping closer. "If that fence isn't gone by tomorrow, you'll regret it." Now, most people would have backed off, maybe argued a bit more, but not my dad. He took a slow breath and replied, "Unless you can prove who you are and who you work for, I'm not taking down anything. You're on private property. Leave." The man clenched his jaw and stormed off down the street, muttering something under his breath. No apology, no explanation, just gone. You might think that was the end of it, but it wasn't. That encounter was just the beginning of something much darker. Because over the next few days, my dad noticed strange things. Unmarked cars driving slowly past our house, unfamiliar figures lingering near the fence, and motion lights tripping in the middle of the night. And my dad, he didn't ignore the signs. He started locking the gates, kept a closer eye on the perimeter. And for the first time in years, he went into the attic, opened up his old footlocker, and pulled out the gear he hadn't touched since retirement. I remember asking him, "Do you really think that's serious?" He didn't say much, just nodded and said, "I don't know what this guy's deal is, but he's not some HOA agent, and he's not done." Turns out, he was right, because what started as a strange complaint about a fence was about to turn into a full-blown confrontation, with gunfire, blood, and the kind of twist no one saw coming. At first, we thought it was a misunderstanding. We told ourselves, maybe he was just confused. Maybe he really believes he works for the HOA. But Deep down, none of it sat right, and things escalated fast. The very next day, around noon, the man came back. But this time, he didn't march up to the fence. He didn't knock. He didn't say a word. He just parked across the street in a black SUV with tinted windows and sat there, watching us. No clipboard this time. No phony uniform. Just sunglasses and that same expressionless stare. He didn't move. Didn't even pretend to be doing something else. He just sat there, engine off, windows up, for almost an hour. My mom pulled the curtains. I was pacing in the hallway, looking at my dad like, what the hell is this guy doing? But my dad, he stayed calm. Too calm. He stood at the kitchen window, arms folded, eyes locked in the SUV like a statue. I asked him, you want to call the cops? He didn't answer right away. He just watched. Eventually, we did call. The dispatcher was polite, but basically said the same thing every small-town cop says in situations like this. As long as he's not on your property and hasn't threatened you, there's not much we can do. Legal boundaries, paperwork, technicalities. But common sense said something else entirely. This wasn't about a fence anymore. This was surveillance. We weren't dealing with some overzealous HOA representative. We were dealing with someone who had a plan. And my dad knew it. That night, something changed in the house. There was this tension in the air, like the moment before a storm hits. Everyone was quiet. Even the dogs seemed to sense it. Around 9 p.m., while the rest of us were trying to pretend it was just another night, my dad slipped away to the attic. I followed him up a few minutes later, and what I saw sent a chill through me. He had pulled out a weathered, olive-drab footlocker, rusty corners, heavy locks. His name still stenciled across the top in black. Inside, a small arsenal. Nothing illegal, but everything prepared. A pistol, a scoped rifle, tactical gloves, a set of camouflage clothing neatly folded, still smelling faintly of oil and gunpowder, maps of our property, a few old communication tools, and a field journal, which he opened, stared at for a second, then closed again without a word. He started quietly cleaning his weapons. Every movement was methodical, practiced, as if his body still remembered the rhythm. Even after years of retirement. Dad, what are you doing? I asked. He didn't look up, just said, we're being watched. And if he's watching, he's planning. And if he's planning, I need to be ready. I stood there for a minute, unsure if I was scared or impressed. Then he looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. You never assume it's nothing. That's how people get caught off guard. I've seen how fast nothing can turn into everything. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. It was instinct, experience. This man had served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had spent weeks at a time alone in hideouts, watching enemy targets through scopes, so far away you couldn't see them with the naked eye. He had read Danger long before it made noise. And tonight, the silence was screaming. He didn't want to scare us. Didn't want to say the words out loud, but he was preparing for something violent. You could feel it. Something was off with that guy in the SUV. It wasn't just a scam anymore. It was personal, targeted. My dad quietly double-checked all the locks in the house. He made sure we knew where the emergency flashlight was, where the first aid kit was, where to go if we needed to hide. And then, just before midnight, he sat down in the dark living room with the lights off, facing the front window, eyes scanning the street like he was on a stakeout. No words, no panic, just pure, focused readiness. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't afraid. But he was no longer just a dad fixing his fence. The Marine had come back. And if the man in the SUV had any idea who he was messing with, he would have turned that car around and never come back again. This is where it gets scary. By day 3, the strange man's silent surveillance had turned into something more, something darker, something deliberate. We didn't know when or how it would happen, but my dad, he knew it was coming. Still, even with all his preparation, none of us were ready for what happened next. It was early afternoon, sun blazing, lawn quiet, birds chirping as usual. You'd think it was just another peaceful day. My dad, ever the optimist, had decided to keep working on the fence. He wasn't going to let some creep stop him from doing what needed to be done. He strapped on his tool belt, adjusted the brim of his cap, and walked out back with measuring tape in one hand and a drill in the other. That's when everything exploded from around the side of the house. Almost like he'd been waiting for the right moment. The man suddenly charged out, sprinting with a terrifying focus. No clipboard. No clipboard this time. He was holding a handgun. Before I could even yell, he raised a weapon and fired. One shot rang out. Crack! The bullet hit my dad square in the shoulder. The impact spun him halfway around, sending the drill flying from his hands. Blood sprayed across the fence. Time froze. But here's the part that still gives me chills. My dad didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He didn't even flinch the way you'd expect someone to when they're hit with a bullet. He dropped, but not out of pain. He dropped to disappear. It was a movement so fast, so fluid, it was like watching a ghost vanish into the shadows. He rolled behind the compost bin in one swift motion, completely out of the shooter's line of sight. The guy looked stunned. He hadn't expected resistance. He'd expected an easy hit, maybe scare an old man, maybe prove a point. But what he didn't know was that he had just shot at a retired Marine sniper, a man trained to survive under fire, to adapt instantly, to eliminate threats before they even know what hit them. And now, he was about to meet that man up close. From behind the bin, my dad silently drew the compact pistol he kept holstered at his side. Not flashy, not even visible under his shirt earlier, but always there, just in case. This was that case. Meanwhile, the man was shouting things like, "You should have listened. This is what happens when people don't respect the rules." His hands shook. His eyes darted around the yard, trying to find where my dad had gone. He didn't see anything. But my dad, he saw everything. With one eye over the top of the compost bin, he tracked the attacker's movement. He measured his steps. He watched how tightly he gripped the gun. He waited for that perfect second, the hesitation, the shift in weight, the angle of exposure. And when it came, my dad didn't hesitate. Boom. One shot. Clean. Precise. The bullet struck the man in the thigh, not fatal, but enough to drop him instantly. The attacker screamed in shock and pain, falling to the ground, his gun sliding several feet away. Now here's where the story flips again. Instead of finishing him off, my dad crawled to his feet, staggered from blood loss but still composed. He limped over, kicked the attacker's weapon away, and, get this, began applying pressure to the man's wound. "Stay with me," he said, pulling off his belt and using it as a makeshift tourniquet. The man looked up at him, stunned, and whispered, "Who are you?" My dad just replied, "The guy you should have walked away from." He called 911 himself, calmly gave him the location, and explained there had been a shooting on his property. He even made sure to tell them the attacker was injured and needed medical attention. Because that's who my dad is, even after being shot, even after defending his life. He still chose to save the man who tried to kill him. Within minutes, the sirens came screaming down the street. Police, EMTs, fire trucks. The backyard looked like something out of a crime drama. The man was arrested, and my dad was rushed to the hospital. Miraculously, the bullet had missed anything vital. The doctor said it was a clean wound, and with a bit of rest and physical therapy, he'd recover fully. But what really stuck with all of us wasn't the violence. It was the precision, the discipline, the control. My dad wasn't a man reacting in fear. He was a trained warrior responding with strategy, with purpose. And in doing so, he stopped a threat not just to himself, but to our entire family. By the time the shot was fired and the intruder was wounded, the whole situation had flipped. This man came into our yard thinking he had control, thinking he was a predator. But within seconds, he realized he had just become the prey. Let me walk you through what happened, moment by moment. Even after being shot in the shoulder, my dad didn't panic, didn't cry out, didn't lose his cool. Instead, he stayed absolutely silent, tucked behind the compost bin, his breathing controlled, his mind locked in. His military training had kicked in like a second skin. It was as if his body already knew what to do: assess, adapt, eliminate the threat. The attacker, on the other hand, He was unraveling. You could hear it in his voice. He started pacing erratically through the yard, waving the gun, yelling nonsense like, "You think you can ignore me? I am the law here. You people never follow the rules. Now look what you made me do." It was chaotic, desperate, unhinged. But my dad wasn't listening to the words. He was listening to something much deeper. The rhythm of the man's footsteps. The crunch of dead leaves under his boots. The pauses. The patterns in his breathing. These weren't just sounds, they were signals. Signals that told my dad exactly where the attacker was. Exactly how fast he was moving. Exactly what kind of panic was setting in. And just like that, my dad began calculating where the shooter was likely to move next, how long before he rounded the shed, how much time he had to act. It was the kind of math you don't do with numbers. You do it with experience. And experience? My dad had plenty. As the man circled toward the back of the shed, gun still raised, my dad shifted slightly, just enough to line up his aim without making a sound. The attacker took 3 more steps, then paused. And that's when my dad struck. Boom. 1 shot. 1 hit. Right to the leg. The attacker screamed in shock, instantly collapsing to the ground. The gun flew out of his hand and landed several feet away in the grass. And here's the wild part. My dad could have ended it right there. Could have made sure this guy never hurt anyone else. But instead, he got up, bleeding from the shoulder, limping from the pain, but still standing. And he walked straight over to the man who had just tried to kill him. He didn't yell, didn't gloat, didn't say, "I told you so." He kicked the attacker's gun further away, got down on one knee, and started applying pressure to the man's wound. Let me repeat that. He shot the guy, then saved his life. That's the kind of man my dad is. Even in a moment when he had every right to walk away, or worse, he chose to preserve life. Because deep down, he never stopped being a Marine. And Marines don't just fight. They protect. While holding pressure on the wound, my dad used his other hand to grab his phone and calmly dialed 911. "Shots fired," he told the dispatcher. "Suspect down. I'm the homeowner. He's disarmed. He needs medical help." No drama. No shaking voice. Just calm, clear communication under pressure, like it was any other day. And when the dispatcher asked if the suspect was still a threat, my dad just said, "Not anymore." As they waited for emergency responders to arrive, the man, moaning and clutching his leg, finally looked up at my dad and croaked, "Who are you?" My dad didn't answer at first. He just tightened the makeshift tourniquet and said, "You picked the wrong fence and the wrong guy." In that moment, it hit me. This man, the so-called HOA agent, thought he was the authority. He thought he could intimidate anyone, control anyone. But what he failed to realize was that my dad had spent most of his life watching dangerous men from a distance, waiting for moments just like this. Except this wasn't war. This was our backyard. And my dad was no longer behind enemy lines. He was protecting his home. The sirens came minutes later. Police, ambulance, lights flashing everywhere. They took the attacker into custody and rushed him to the hospital. He'd live, but he'd also be facing charges that would keep him behind bars for a long time. And my dad, he was patched up at the hospital. The doctor said the bullet missed vital areas, but the real surprise was how calm he stayed through all of it. But for us, it wasn't a surprise at all. Because when things went from bad to terrifying, my dad didn't just survive. He took control. He turned the tables. He became the storm. The backyard was still echoing with the chaos when the first squad car rolled up. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights flooded the neighborhood. And within minutes, the scene transformed from a tranquil suburban yard into a full-blown crime scene. Officers leapt from their cruisers with weapons drawn, unsure what they were walking into. But what they found was something straight out of a movie. An armed homeowner applying first aid to the very man who had just tried to kill him. My dad stood up slowly, hands raised, calmly announced himself as a victim, and pointed to where he disarmed the attacker. The cops moved fast, secured the attacker's weapon, handcuffed him, and called in paramedics. He was bleeding out from the shot to his leg, but thanks to my dad's improvised tourniquet, he was going to survive. Barely. But the real twist came later, once the cops ran his ID. The man wasn't from the HOA. He wasn't from any official agency at all. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to be in the neighborhood. Turns out, this guy was a disgraced ex-contractor. Someone who had once been licensed to do home repairs, but lost everything after multiple fraud cases and legal disputes. A real smooth talker who had turned to a new kind of scam. He'd been targeting quiet neighborhoods without official homeowners associations. His strategy was simple, but sinister. He'd pose as a fake HOA agent, walk around with clipboard and a compliance badge he printed himself, and threaten homeowners about so-called violations. He then offered to help fix the issue for a price. New paint jobs, fence removals, landscaping overhauls. He would either demand upfront payment and never return, or start work and abandon it halfway through. Dozens of people had filed complaints, but he was slippery. Changing towns, changing names, always staying just outside the law's reach. But this time, he picked the wrong house, the wrong family, the wrong fence, and definitely the wrong Marine. Once police pieced everything together, they were shocked. One of the officers even told my dad, "You're lucky to be alive." But my dad, cool as ever, just shrugged and said, "I've seen worse." That's not just bravado. That's the voice of someone who's been in real combat zones. Someone who's been trained to stay calm when bullets fly. Someone who's faced danger that most of us can't imagine. But even though this wasn't a battlefield, my dad treated it with the same discipline, the same mindset, and that's what saved his life. The attacker was taken into custody after receiving emergency surgery. He's now facing multiple felony charges, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, impersonating a public official, fraud, and more. The DA plans to use my dad's body cam footage. Yes, my dad wears one when working outside just in case, to help convict him. The story made headlines in our local paper. Some even called it a suburban standoff. Reporters knocked on our door for interviews, but my dad turned them down. He wasn't looking for attention. He was just glad it was over. And that fence? Still standing. Still strong. But now, it's more than just planks of wood and screws hammered into dirt. It's a symbol of vigilance, of courage, and of what happens when you refuse to be intimidated. My dad eventually finished the repairs. He even reinforced the entire structure, not because he had to, but because that fence now holds meaning. Every time I walk by it, I see more than wood. I see the moment my dad went from homeowner to hero, from a target to a defender. And the next time someone tries to tell you that nothing ever happens in the suburbs, show them this story. If this story taught us anything, it's this: white heavy checkmark, never underestimate the people around you. That quiet old guy with a drill might just be a retired Marine sniper. White heavy checkmark, trust your instincts when something feels off. If someone won't show ID or tries to intimidate you into action, that's a red flag. White heavy checkmark, and if you're going to pick a fight, make absolutely sure it's not with a Marine. Especially not one who's been trained to stay hidden, stay calm, and strike only when it counts. So if you're still here, drop a flex biceps in the comments for my dad. Hit that like button if you think he's a total legend. And tell us, have you ever had to deal with a scammer or someone pretending to be someone they're not? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Stay alert, stay safe, and remember, courage doesn't always wear uniform. Sometimes it wears a ball cap and fixes fences. If you love heart-touching stories, make sure to subscribe, like, and share emotional tales so you never miss out on our emotional videos.